Well, as a guest speaker, one of the joys of being a guest speaker is you get to choose the passage that you're teaching on. I know it sounds like a crazy thing, but that's actually a joy that I get. And usually I like to go with something really obscure that you guys, something in Leviticus, because let's be honest, who reads Leviticus? Some of us do, and everyone, you can look at me with judgment eyes. It's okay. But, instead I was like, let's go over someone a little bit different. Let's go over someone that we've actually probably all have heard about, and it's a man named Abraham, or Abram. Now, Abraham is such an interesting character because the great part of Abraham is we're extremely familiar with him. So as soon as I mention Abraham, some of us want our seats to recline and go to sleep, and that's okay. You want to sit there and go, I understand everything about Abraham. Yes, I've heard about him. But the truth is, oftentimes our understanding of Abraham comes from Sunday school because it's a Sunday school topic. It's one of those things that those kids, in that room, apparently, that's the door they come through, that room, they learn about Abraham and they sing fun songs. And you guys all know the song. It goes, Father Abraham. I love it. See, you guys all know that song, and that's where our understanding goes. It's like done. We're like, yes, it's Father Abraham, and I am one of them. But what are we a Father Abraham of? Father Abraham is such an interesting man because the truth is Abraham is a guy that is considered a patriarch or a father of three separate faiths. We know for us as a Christian faith that he is the father of faith or an example of faith. For the Jewish religion, the Jewish faith, he is the actual father of the faith. And then for Islam, he is considered the patriarch of the faith. This is Abraham. And we see this man that has so many different aspects of his life, and he's changed the world in a way that we can't imagine, but we kind of get lost right there. Because what we do with Abraham is often we just make him amazing. We put him on the Mount Rushmore of faith, and we're just like, that's Abraham over there. He lived by faith. And we kind of lose touch with him. He's not a man that we can really grab onto and say, he was just like me. But the truth is, when we look at the Bible is an interesting book because it's about God, but it's also about God's relationship with us. And it's a very human relationship because we're part of it. Abraham was very human. He struggled. He had difficulties. And in fact, his faith was not easily obtained. We usually think that faith is so easy, like, oh yeah, all you have to do is have faith. Have you ever just tried to have faith? I mean, it's great for like a minute. Yeah, I have faith. But it's a struggle, and that's what we get to see today, because we're going to look at Abraham, and we're going to look at where he came from. So to start with, Abraham comes from the city of Ur, which is the greatest city name of all time. And the reason it was called Ur is because he would go into Cana, and he's there, and they're like, where are you from? And he's like, Ur. It's just that place, that it's over there. Ur is an amazing town. Now, Ur realistically is close to Mesopotamia. It's close to modern-day Iraq. But this is where Abraham was from. He's from a land far away that we really don't talk about that much. But this is where he lived. And he was married to a lady named Sarai. Now, Sarai is a wonderful woman. Sarai is a woman that we actually see great things from, but Sarai had something go on with her. She was barren. In fact, it says in Genesis chapter 11, verse 30, it says, but Sarai was barren. Now, for us, like me, that don't really understand big words like barren, and I understand it's only 6 letters, but who uses that anymore? God was like, okay, by the way, she had no child. So to understand Sarah, she was old and she didn't have a child. We usually look at this and think of her as this wonderful woman and this lady of faith that we see her have a child eventually. But up to this point in her life, she was just sitting there going, I have no kids. I have no baby. I didn't get to raise them. And we know she's advanced in years even at this point. So she's supposed to be a grandma. Now, how many grandparents are out there? By the way, grandparents are the greatest thing in the world. Just take your kids and let them go on dates. You want to know what the best reason for it? Because you get to give them back. Right? You get to actually enjoy your child. Because how many parents are out there? You don't enjoy your kids until you're a grandparent. Like, it is just a true fact, right? You're sitting there and you're like, can you leave my house? Please. This is the point where Sarah was supposed to be. She was supposed to be at the point where she takes her kids, but she has no kids. And this is actually a very sad thing. And God loves barren women because he uses them a lot. So here she is. She's going through everything. They're living in Ur. And now God finally speaks. It says right here, in chapter 12 of Genesis, that's the chapter we're going to go over. It says, now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country. I want to pause right there because I love how God speaks to Abraham here. It's so loving, isn't it? It's one of those moments that we actually like to think that God never used the word get out. Have you ever used the word get out? It's a lot of fun. Right? Get out of here. Have you ever been told to get out? Have you ever been kicked out of your house? I might have at one point in my life. You know, it is a great experience. Get out of my house. And you sit there and you're like, wow, this is really bold. Because usually we think of God when he speaks to us that it's so loving and gentle. He comes around and he's like, hey, Craig, so I was thinking, just in case you were wondering, I think you might want to move to Texas. I'm not really moving to Texas. But anyone here, if God's calling you to move to Texas, go for it. They're all keep moving in here. Anyone from Texas? No way. Wow. All right. That joke did not land. So here we go. They're coming in, and we usually think of God as this gentle, loving man. And he's just like, oh, okay, can you just do this for me? This is going to be so awesome. But no, Abraham speaks to God in a different way. And God looks at him and says, get out of your country. Whew. But it actually gets even a little worse. Because he sits there and then says, from your family and from your father's house. Imagine that now. Here you are, get out of your land. And by the way, leave your family and move out of your dad's home. We do need to talk about that for a moment. He was 75. So I don't want to hear anyone complain about millennials living in their parents' home. And they can't until they're 75. Bible. Right? Here's Abraham, and he's living in his dad's home. And he's like, get out of your dad's home. I think God was actually giving grace to his father, but that's okay. Here he is. He's like, get out of your family. But this is actually a big deal. Because at this moment, what's happening is God's asking Abraham to leave everything he knows. His city, the favorite coffee shop he has, his dad, his family, everything. He's like, I want you to leave it all. And this isn't like we leave now. For Abraham, it was leave and never speak to again. There wasn't sending a letter home. He didn't get to go home after 3 years of going overseas. He didn't get to come home. No, it's not like even calling home. It was you're leaving and you will not never ever see your dad again. And he adds to a land that I will show you. So here Abraham is. God's telling him to leave his everything he knows and adds on this little thing of going, by the way, you're going to a land that I will show you, but I'm not going to tell you where. How many of us would pause right there and sit there and go, God, my dad's going to want to know where I'm going because I want to know where I'm going. Where is God going to lead Abraham to? God never tells him. He's just like, you're going to go over there. You're going to go to a new land, and everyone's going to think you're crazy. Now, why would God do this? This is really the question that we often have. Because sometimes God leads us to a place and we're leading and he's leading us and we're going, God, this is so confusing. Why am I going over here when you're leading me when I don't want to go over there? And I think a lot of it is because God likes to answer our prayers. Do you know that? He likes to give us the desires of our hearts. Because we see in the next verse, right here it says, to make you a great nation, I will bless you. I will make your name great. You shall be blessed. Now, why is this a desire of the heart? Why is this something that God is actually answering a prayer to? Because we know that God loves to do this because of Psalm chapter 37, verse 4, when it says, delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. See, I actually believe that he wanted a child. See, I don't think it was just Sarah that was sitting there going, it would be great to have a crying baby. It would be great to watch him grow up. It'd be great to have to marry off my son because he doesn't know how to find a woman. That's later on in Genesis. You can read ahead. I think Abraham wanted a kid. I think Abraham was sitting there going, I would love to have a child. I would love to have this. And here God is, and he's like, I want you to leave everything, and you're going to become a great nation. Now, Abraham, we're going to see, might not always have his head screwed on correctly. I think he could figure this one out. In order to be a great nation, you must reproduce. Does anyone know that? Right? You can't, your lineage dies if you don't have any kids. So here he is, and he's like, okay, so God's going to give me the desires of my heart. He's going to give me what I want. He's going to make me a great nation. This is hard. The reason this is so hard is because God is leading him to do something he probably doesn't want to do. How many of us want to leave everything we know and move away? Some of us do. I've always wanted to leave everything I know and just move. Iceland is my dream. I've never been there, but I want to live there forever and never come back. My wife keeps saying no, so I guess, there's a problem there, but that's okay. We have this dream of going, I want something. And God says, I want you to leave everything you know. He doesn't want to do it, but yet that is for his desire. That is for the promise. This often happens in our lives. Usually we pray to God and go, God, I desire this one thing. And you might pray stupid prayers, some dumb prayers. I have. One of my prayers, and this is my favorite prayer of all time because it's ridiculous, I ask God for a six-pack. The ab thing. Because, let's be honest, every man is like, yes, I want to be ripped. I want to be jacked. And I used to pray, because you guys can judge me. Once again, this is a judgment zone of me, because that's what I get for being up here. But I used to always pray and say, God, I just want to wake up tomorrow with a six-pack. Now, I'll tell you this. He never answered that prayer. But I do have ideas of how he might answer that prayer. He could give me a really difficult job that I hate, that I exercise all the time, and I end up with a six-pack. Could you imagine if God did that? He gave me the desires of my heart, and I'm like, I really don't like how I got there. But he gave me the desires of my heart, because I would, turn into Matthew McConaughey, and I would never wear a shirt. You guys know that. Come on. Right? This is the way that we are, because sometimes when we have a desire of our heart, we don't like how God gets us there. And God is asking Abraham to do something crazy. But then there's the next thing that happens. Because we sit there and go, okay, yeah, it's a desire of my heart. I'll take it. I'll take it. Now, how do we respond? This is hard for us because how do we actually respond when God says, I'm going to give you your promise? We want to respond well. We want to respond just like Willy Wonka told Charlie. When Willy Wonka asked Charlie in the chocolate factory, don't forget what happened to a man who suddenly got everything he wanted. And Charlie responded, what happened? And Mr. Wonka said, he lived happily ever after. We sit there and we want that, don't we? We want to be the people that are like, yes, God's giving me my promise, and I'm just going to live in that, and it's going to be good. How many of us are there right now? I'll tell you right now, I'm not. There's honesty. Because I go the opposite route. God, you're going to give me everything I want. You're going to give me the desires of my heart, and I start to worry I'm going to lose it. Isn't that an amazing thing? This is no clearer than when we get something we really want, like a new house, a new car. I love new cars, don't you? You don't know why I love new cars? Because you can't bring anything into the car. The owner doesn't even want them in the car. There's no drinks in my car. And I'm sitting there going, okay, you can't eat food in my car. Because what happens if it gets destroyed? What happens if our desire gets destroyed? What happens if it doesn't work out? We love to panic. And God knows this. Isn't that awesome? I love the fact that God actually knows that we panic. And the reason I say he knows that is because God's next response is, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. I love the fact that here God is, and he's like, by the way, I'm going to curse the people that don't like you. Go all Romeo and Juliet. Mercutio, plague on both your houses. No one likes, wow. It's okay. It's okay. One day, there's a really good movie. It's called Romeo plus Juliet, and they use guns instead. So you can like that one. But here's the truth. God is sitting there going, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to allow you protection over this promise. Now, we know who God is, right? Now, God gave Abraham this promise. He gave him this desire of his heart that he's going to be a great nation. And Abraham, we're going to see, panics about it. We love to panic about it. And the reason we love to panic about it is because we forget who God is. This is an important thing for us to know. We forget who God is because we forget him in our own worry. We love to do it. And the reason I say that is because it happens over and over and over again in the Bible. It happened to Job, and God had a response that I love. The best answer to when we start to lose faith, when we start to worry, is when God talked to Job in Job 38. In verse 4, he says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. It's a great question because God's basically saying, I am God. But he continues on, he says, who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the lines upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstones? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. We actually see that God's asking the question, is saying, do you trust who I am, even though you don't know any of the things I know? And that's what Abraham is being asked by God. Because he's saying, I want you to get out. I'm going to give you what you want. Don't worry about anything that's going to happen. Don't worry about the pain. It's going to work out. Now, how many of us would jump? It's really easy to jump at this moment. It's really good to jump on this moment because this is what Abraham does. It says, so Abram in verse 4, departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. I love Abraham because he was old and still moving. 75 years old. And he goes, all right, God, I'm going to move. I'm going to be a man that follows you. See, Abraham is a father of faith because he's living out his faith right now. He's not going to the whole time, but he's going to live out it at this moment. He's living out what Paul said in Romans chapter 1, verse 17. It says, for in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. Isn't that a beautiful statement? It's really easy to live by faith the first day. I'll tell you that right now. It's the most simple thing I've ever seen. God tells you to do something and you're like, yes, that first day. Ooh, sorry about that. That first day is good. That first day is easy. That first day we're moving. But this is what has crept into the church. This is what has happened to us. And that is, we go on, we live by faith, God calls us to something, and then it gets really difficult because God doesn't answer his promises right away. And we don't live by faith. What we do is we live by feelings of the day. I don't feel like God's keeping me here. It's amazing being a pastor. Because people will walk up to me all the time and say, God has called me to this. And I sit there and I look at them and I go, great. But you know what usually happens? About 2 months later, suddenly God called them to something different. And the truth is, either God changed his mind, which we know he doesn't, or they were lying. And they weren't living by faith. Because the hard thing is God will often tell us to do something crazy and we'll start it off, but it's hard. It's extremely difficult. That's the pain of being with a man and woman of faith. And this is where Abraham is. So he goes on, he departs, and then Abraham took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother, his son. By the way, if you actually look at that and say Abraham wasn't supposed to bring Lot, that is true. Lot was never supposed to go to the promised land. He told him to leave his father's house. Lot was there. So he brought Lot, his father's son, and all their possessions, and all their possessions they gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. So here they are. If you can envision this movement going on, is Abraham's like, okay, Sarah, we're leaving, and we're going to pack up our U-Haul, our servants, and they're going to drag everything we own across the desert. How would you like to be one of those servants? Sarah, rumors have it, she had a huge shoe collection. And some poor servant had to drag it across the desert. So they're moving across the desert. Once again, I'm sure Sarah was like, so did God tell you where we're going? Did God tell you if we're leaving to go to, the beach? Are we going to the mountains? Where are we going? God never actually told them. So they're departing, they're leaving, they're moving on, and they come to the land of Canaan, and Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem as far as the terebinth tree in Morah, and the Canaanites were then in the land. So he's moving to the west, if you can imagine this. And as he's moving to the west, I'm sure he's sitting there going, are we there yet? Are we at this place? Now, if you've ever been to the Jordan, which they passed through at this point, it is kind of deserty. So I'm sure some of the servants were like, this place is really hot. Can we keep moving? And they had no idea where they were going. They were just moving and moving and moving. And they come to a land that is possessed literally by the Canaanites. They own the land. And as it's possessed by the Canaanites, in verse 7 it says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, 'To your descendants I will give you this land.'" Now, I want to read that again. "To your descendants I will give you this land." Abraham was just promised the land. How many of us think that God gave Abraham the land? Right? I used to always think this. I was like, yeah, God gave Abraham the land. He actually gave Abraham's descendants the land. He made Abraham live in a land as a stranger. He said, "I'm going to give you this awesome place." By the way, the Canaanites own it right now. This is similar to God coming to you and saying, "I'm going to give you your neighbor's house." How many of us would walk to our neighbor and say, "So God told me that you're supposed to give me your house"? Could you imagine doing that? Nice. We have one person that's crazy enough to go to the insane asylum because it is absolutely nuts. Here God gives Abraham this land that is not his, that's possessed by something else. And as God gives it to him, Abraham's like, sweet, I'm going to build you an altar. So he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Abraham builds this altar saying, "I'm going to get this land." Now, we have to take a step back. Guess who's not pregnant right now? Sarah. I mean, really think about this. Here they're traveling, and you might be like, okay, they were traveling, and Sarah's probably like, I'm traveling, so I'm not pregnant yet. God's just taking his time. And now God's saying, here's your land. I'm going to give it to you. It's going to be awesome. And he's looking around going, this is pretty sweet. Israel has some cool places. There's a beach and there's mountains. And they're looking around going, this is good. But yet God doesn't actually give them the promise. See, it says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, it says, "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he received an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelled in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob and the heirs with him of the same promise." Abraham had to sit there and wait on God. He had to sit there and wait and wait and wait. He just lived in a tent. His son lived in a tent. His son's son lived in a tent. His son's sons, there's 12 of them, lived in a tent. All of them have a promise from God that you're going to possess this land, that this is going to be yours, but they were sitting there going, how? How is God going to actually do this? Because none of them actually seen the promise fulfilled. And this is where it gets really difficult. When God gives us a promise and it doesn't happen right away. See, this is where it gets actually difficult for us to live by faith because we see a promise from God. We're going on. And as the days turn to months and the months turn to years and the years turn to decades, we sit there and go, God, you're not listening to me. You're not a God of promise. How am I going to live by faith if I don't get to receive this? This is hard. And I'll give you a fun fact here. The first people to possess the land of Abraham's descendant wasn't until Joshua invaded and conquered the land. So if anyone questions how they got the land, it was Joshua. God used Joshua to actually give them the land. But they're sitting there going, this isn't my land. And it keeps on going in verse 8. It says, and he moved there to the mountains east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. So Abraham journeyed, going on still towards the south. We read this last little portion of the first section of chapter 12, and we can say it's such glory, can't we? So there he is. He's living by faith. He's there. He's celebrated. He's building an altar to the Lord. And we pause. We usually stop reading. This is where the Sunday school class ends. But this is also where real life begins. This is where the human element of the Bible comes in. This is where the element of who we are as people begins. Because, yes, he's living there for a moment and he's going south, so he's exploring the land. But as so happens in our lives, something goes wrong when we're waiting. Have you ever noticed that? You come to the place and you're like, I'm so content just waiting on the Lord. And then it's like an atom bomb just drops. And that's what happens to Abraham. You see, he has a reaction to a natural crisis. It says in verse 10, it says, now there was a famine in the land. Now, for those of you who are like me and don't understand big words, famine is no food or water. That means no food or water. Could we imagine? We haven't had a famine in America since the Dust Bowl. So none of us really know what this is like. We don't sit there and go, yeah, I get it, Abraham. Why don't you just tough it out? No, he was hungry. Have you ever been hungry? Now, I'm not talking like right now, you're just like, I want to go out to eat. It is 12:04, just so you guys know, it's 12:04. How many of you are hungry for lunch, right? You're sitting there going, please, I'm dying. Now imagine this, 12:04 in 3 days. And I keep you here. I'm going to try it. Fern said I could do whatever I wanted. So we're going to be here for 3 days experiencing hunger and thirst. Here he is. He's just sitting there going, I'm so hungry and thirsty. So what do you do when you're hungry and thirsty? You find a place to eat. How many of you guys know where you're going out to eat after this? No one? Wow. That's a lot of awkward conversations in the car. I'm hungry. Where do you want to eat? I don't know, honey. Can you just lead, please? You're supposed to lead. Tell me where I'm eating because I don't want to choose. By the way, I didn't talk about this in first service, but I'm going to because I feel like there's a lot of marriage. That's not leading. As a husband, choosing where you're going is just a pain. That's why you have kids decide, and they struggle just as much, right? So no, they're sitting here, and they're hungry, and what do? We want to find food. So Abraham, just like us, is like, I hear about this place called Egypt. So, and Abraham went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. See, the thing about Egypt is they have this really cool river. It's never dried up. It's called the Nile. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard about it. There's alligators in it. It's really cool. But the thing about the Nile is, especially during the ancient world, Egypt and Mesopotamia were the two largest cities. And the reason was they both had large rivers and they had great amounts of food. So he's like, I heard about this place called Egypt. I've never been there, but they have food. And it's not like when, some chain comes from California and you eat it and you're like, that was all right. And Californians are like, oh, that was the greatest food ever. And you're like, that was, nah, okay. No, he's sitting there and he's like, I heard about Egypt. They have food. I'm so excited for that. It's food. So what does Abraham do? Just like all of us, he goes to Egypt. Now, God never said you can't go to Egypt. He was perfectly fine with it. And they go to Egypt. But as he's going to Egypt, he has an epiphany. And it's a great epiphany. And it came to pass that when they were close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, indeed, I know you are a woman of beauty. Now, Let me translate that for you. He looked at his wife and said, "You're hot." Now, this is a good thing, right? Husbands, tell your wife that she's beautiful. And you can use slang words like "you're hot." It's okay. Right? So you can even do it now. "You're beautiful. You're gorgeous." And he's like, "This is great." I'm sure Sarai was sitting there going, "I know, honey, I know, honey, I know. Don't worry." But this was actually a problem. Usually husbands don't think having an attractive wife is a problem until someone wants to kill you for her. Right? That's a problem in life. And women out there, just so you know, if two men are ready to kill each other for you and one does, that's probably not the right man for you. You can try it out, but that's probably not the right man for you. She's sitting there and she's like, "You're beautiful." And then he goes on, he says, "Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live." He's looking at her going, "They're going to kill me, honey. They're going to kill me." Now, where is his faith here? See, this is where the fear comes in. This is our real life now. Because God gave him a promise to what? Have kids. Now, I've alluded to it before. It does take two living people, just so you all know, two living. They have to be breathing to reproduce. We know this. And yet, here he is looking at Sarah going, "I'm going to be killed. So I'm going to come up with a plan." And I love plans because plans make me excited. Because we all make really dumb plans. Like Abraham. And here's his plan. He says, "Please say you are my sister. Take it, or that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you." So here is his plan. He looks at Sarah and he's like, "So just tell him you're my sister." This is a really, really bad plan because you can look at your wife now and say, "Can you go around and say you're my sister?" So this is how you prove that it's a good plan. I want you to go to wherever you're going out to eat and just make out in that place. And when the waiter or waitress comes up and goes, "Oh, you guys are so cute," say, "This is my sister." Really think about that plan. How would that go? How many women are you on board? No. But this is Abraham's plan. Tell him you're my sister. Now, it is just a dumb plan. And there's a reason why. How is he going to get her back? He's literally marrying off his wife to someone else, pretending he's her sister. It's not a smart plan. And I love that because this is our plans when we don't have faith. I love it because God gives us a promise and then we come up with our own genius plan. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get everything I ever wanted. And then 5 years later, you're looking back at your plan and going, "Wow, I'm not smart at all." Abraham has a dumb plan. He's going in and doing it. And the best part is that Sarah is like, "Okay. All right." So they're equally yoked in this plan. It's okay. So it goes on in verse 15. So this is their plan. And it says, "So it was when Abraham came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman that she was very beautiful." So he predicted his downfall. They're going to say that they're beautiful. And in verse 15, it continues on. It says, "The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commanded her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house." Here she is, and she's taken not to just some guy, not to Potiphar's house, no, to Pharaoh's house. Just so you know, Pharaoh had a lot of wives. It was just normal back then. So she joined the club. Just hanging out. Now, this is a problem for Abraham, and he might not realize it right now. She's sitting there in Pharaoh's house on the Group W bench. She's just sitting there going, "What do we do now? What do we do in this moment? I'm am I supposed to marry Pharaoh? Is that God's plan? No, this is Abraham's plan. This is what Abraham happens. But it kind of works out for Abraham right now. It says he treated Abram. The Pharaoh treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. So you know, you can read this, Abraham was willing to give up Sarah for a donkey. He was sitting there going, this is working out. I'm making money. This is good. Problem. How does she get out? I would love to sit down with Abram and be like, okay, so how are you going to get her out? Usually Pharaoh's not very kind to people that, try to steal his wife. They might tweet about you. Or kill you, right? This is a real life thing. He now made his problem so much worse because they're sitting there and going, how do I get her out? Now, this is the thing I love about God. Because we don't always live by faith. And neither did Abram, as we see. We often might have a promise that we live by faith at a moment, and we're like, yes, God, I'm going to grab hold of that. I'm going to do that. But then as we grab hold of it, it gets hard, and we let it go, and we start coming up with our own plans and our own schemes and our own ideas. And we get ourselves in trouble. And then God comes in, and he's like, I'm done with this person. I can use someone else, right? No, that's not the case. See, the thing I love about God is that when we live by faith and we have our promises from him, he doesn't forget them. He's sitting there going, okay, you just made a big mess for me. A huge mess. So I have to fix it. And that's what he does. See, Abram didn't know how to get out of this, but God did. Because right here, in verse 17, the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Don't you love that verse? I do, because it doesn't tell me how many times God plagued the house of Pharaoh. My guess is 10. There's a reason why, Exodus. Right? Think about how much Egypt must love Israel. The first time they ever hung out with Israel, he came down, pretended his wife was his sister, and they plagued Pharaoh's house. The next time they come down, don't want to leave, get stuck there, and God plagues their house 10 times. Egypt might have a bone to pick with, Israel. Just because they kept getting their house plagued. But this is happening right here. God is plaguing the house. Now, there's a reason God does the plagues, is because he needs to get them out. He needs to say, we are moving on from this situation. So as they're plaguing the house, I'm sure Pharaoh was like, why? Usually when something goes wrong in our lives, we take that step back and go, what's going on? Why am I here? And I have an idea that Sarah was probably like, excuse me, I'm actually married. Could you imagine Pharaoh at this moment? You're what? No, I promise. I'm actually married to my brother. Abram. What? Creepy. And God's plaguing the house. So here Sarah is. She's the new girl. She's the one that's coming in, and she's the problem. So what does Pharaoh do? Normally, he kills her and Abram. See, this is the best part about the story. Because Abram put himself in so much danger and had such an issue with Pharaoh that as he had this issue with Pharaoh, Pharaoh should kill him and had rights to as a Pharaoh. And yet, God does something amazing. It says in verse 18, it says, and Pharaoh called Abram and said, what have you done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go away. He gets yelled at, and that's all. Think about that. All he gets is a little lecture about, please don't tell her that anymore that you're my sister. By the way, this happens again in the Bible, so they don't really learn. This is the outcome. See, this is the great part about living by faith. And this is the great part about what we are in God. Because the human part of us wants to rebel and come up with our own ideas. The human part of us wants to come up with our own schemes and our own desires when God doesn't answer his promises right away. Because Sarah wasn't pregnant. Because they didn't get the land God promised them. They had to wait. Things started to go bad. We have to wait. We have to say, God, I guess that wasn't really from you. But yet we know this is from God. Now, this is the moment that many of us come to. You see, we go in and we live by faith and we have promises from God. And I will tell you, everyone in this room has a promise from God. We know the promises in the Bible, but we know that he has plans for our lives, desires for our lives. And it's hard for us because sometimes they don't come to fruition. Sometimes we might look at it and go, that's the farthest thing from my promise. And we start to act like Abraham. And no one would say that we are living by faith. But yet Abraham is learning to. And that's the joy. Because it continues on in verse 20, it says, so Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. The thing that happened to Abraham here, the thing that happened to Abraham that happens to us is oftentimes God uses our own rebellion and our own dumb plans to push us along. To push us to a place where we are actually going to have the promise fulfilled. And we can actually leave there living by faith. You see, in this moment, Abraham just starts learning. He's not done learning how to live by faith. He has a whole wife issue again with another wife. He forgets to live by faith. He didn't start out as a Christian saying, I'm going to live by faith. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. It's going to be all this. No, he had to learn. And God allowed him to. He allowed him to learn, and he allowed him to walk out of Egypt so he could walk back into the promised land and dwell there, waiting for his promise. And that's the call today. You see, the call for this service, the call for this time in our lives is that we walk out of here waiting on God's promise, even if we don't see him. See, some of us in this room might be here at church saying, yeah, it's great. This is what I do on Sunday mornings. I listen to a guy speak and he talks for a while and it's okay, but I'm struggling with God. I'm struggling seeing his promises because his promises are taking way too long. His promises hurt way too much. That could be us. Because living by faith hurts. And sometimes we have to wait. And as we're waiting, we might have came up with a scheme on our own to make it happen, and we're not willing to wait. That might be us, but the call is that we actually walk out of here and we wait on the Lord. We walk out of here saying, God, I'm ready for your promise, and I'm ready to get there, and I'm ready to live by your faith. And the other thing is, we're called not to worry. You see, so many of us worry all the time. I'm telling you, we love to worry. How many of you guys love to worry? I love to worry. I love watching the news just to watch other people worry. Come on, we all do that. I mean, how many of you guys remember the bird epidemic, the bird virus? That came to fruition, didn't it? How many of you guys have bird flu? No one. But man, it was panic. We love to worry. And we love to worry about our stuff and our promises from God. And the truth is, we don't need to worry because we have a God that knows why an ostrich sticks his head in the sand. And we have a God that cares about us and tells us not to worry. That is our call. That is how we're supposed to leave this place today. That is what we're supposed to desire from God, is to have that promise in our lives. And if we need that promise renewed, just ask him and he'll tell you again. It's amazing. And the last thing is, if you don't know this God, if you're listening to me saying, man, this God, it sounds whacked. He sounds crazy. He is, and it's amazing. God is really cool because he does really weird stuff with really weird people like me and like you and like Abram. And you want to know him. I'm going to ask that as the band comes up, that you come up when they're singing and come up. There's men and women up here to pray for you that would love to tell you about this Jesus guy who accessed us so we can have that relationship with God. That we can have this relationship with him where we can come and we can live by faith. Let us pray.